In 2016 in Flagstaff, Arizona, I was studying creative writing and finishing my MFA, and also had been working as a curator for an arts council. And I had been kind of incubating my creative ideas. And as my partner, Owen Fritz, who's been a great help, and he's the fabricator on the project, we were driving down the road one day and I said, what if we found an old telephone booth with a rotary phone and a bifold door that you could walk into and dial a number and listen to poetry through the receiver? And he said, that's a great idea. Let's make that happen. And so we started the Telepoem Booth journey, and I tracked down an old vintage phone booth. And the style that the Telepoem Booth utilizes is the 70s Quest or Ma Bell style. It's got the bell blue, it's called, and a marquee sign on the top that has a phone and the word phone in the middle of it. And so I took that marquee and redesigned it. It's a bit of a trompe-l'oeil, fool the eye, and it says poems in the middle of the phone icon. And it's so similar to the original that a lot of people just walk by and say, oh my gosh, there's a phone booth here, and don't really even see the word poems instead of the word phone.
Yeah.
And since 2016, we've installed 13 different Telepoem booths, and those have been anywhere from museum installations at MOXIE, the Museum of Exploration and Innovation in Santa Barbara, for a limited engagement, to permanent installations in Iowa, in Santa Fe, New Mexico, Las Vegas, New Mexico, and semi-permanent installations in Bisbee, Arizona. There is a permanent installation in State College, Pennsylvania, the home of Penn State.
Okay. So how does this actually work? You know, when someone picks up the phone, dials in which poem they want, how does that happen?
Well, first of all, the poems are categorized very carefully. We have 1,000 poems in the whole entire Telepoem Booth directory. And to make sure that the telepoem numbers aren't repeated, I have categorized them by the poet's own area code of their personal phone. And then the first three prefix digits are the poet's last name, converted into numbers. You know, you can look at a phone and there are numbers on each button that correspond to letters. And the last four digits are the first four letters of the poem title. And that way we have totally eliminated any repetition. And so you look up in the Telepoem directory a listing of the poems that are native to the area where the Telepoem booth is placed. So you don't have to page through 1,000 poem listings. You can look through usually like up to 200. And those are categorized by last name of the poet, but also by topic listing. So we have beauty, sensuality, children poems, political poems, spiritual, religious poems. And so then you pick one that you want and you dial it. And a lot of the Telepoem booths are rotary phones. So then you have to maybe learn how to dial a rotary phone. And so it is really an interactive art piece that requires some energy and some engagement from the user. And they complete the art piece by doing that. And then you listen to the poem through the receiver.
How did you choose which ones you wanted to put in there? Because, I mean, there are a ridiculous amount of poems out there, and I'm sure you have a lot of favorites.
Right. Well, I do have some famous poems in there by famous poets, but a lot of poetry is unknown. And so even famous poets are not very well known outside of a small niche literary world. And so I decided, rather than trying to track down reproduction rights or different rights from each poet that I loved, I wanted to get the voices of the people included into the Telepoem Booth. So while I do have a lot of famous poets and a lot of poet laureates from each area, the majority of the poetry is written by poets in each area that aren't necessarily well known. A lot of them are published, some of them are not. And so it is really, by doing that, it really becomes an art piece of the people and a representation of people's voices from each area. And so, for instance, in Iowa, I have a lot of poems about the land. And then in Santa Barbara, I had a lot of poems that were political. And so it's very interesting. Poets and writers of each area and of each region tend to focus on different topics, right? Because we are a diverse people. The whole, all of, poets write about so many different things. And so it's really great because then a lot of people in the area get to know other people that have written about stuff that they are also interested in. And then for those of the users who are a little bit more curious and want to kind of engage on a deeper level, there are some Easter eggs in the Telepoem Booth. And you can go into the telepoembooth.com website and look up different directories and dial different numbers that aren't listed there.
Very cool. It kind of reminds me of, there was like this journalist and writer, and he would broadcast like poems, people reading poems over the radio. So that's really what this feels like to me.
Oh, that's cool. Right. Well, there's something about poetry that really needs to be heard. It can't just be a reading on a page. You can't just look at it to really fully understand it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Maya Angelou says, that the human voice brings poetry to life. And that's what I believe too.
Absolutely. Do you know if you've got more of these popping up across the states, or if you're kind of on pause?
I am on hiatus because of the pandemic, but maintaining the current Telepoem booths that are already installed. Interactive, touchable art piece that is based on the haptic senses of dialing, of entering a phone booth. It's very contextual that way, and aural, listening to the poetry, and visual, because you get to see an old lost object. I call phone booths lost objects.
Yeah. Before I let you,
what I've been focusing on is I have published 2 Telepoem Booth books.
okay.
One of them is called Telepoem Booth Santa Fe Collected Calls. And this is a collection of Santa Fe poets and their Telepoem Booth numbers. And so it does have Telepoem Booth numbers that you can dial in any Telepoem booth. So people can read the poetry at the same time as they're listening to it. So this one is Santa Fe specific. And then this one is called Telepoem Booth Missed Calls and Other Poetry. And it is a collection of some of my favorite poets that aren't necessarily collected in any other directory, including from Wichita, Albert Goldbarth, who's a classic poet that I studied in college, and Chris Green from Chicago, and other really great poets that I'm kind of personal friends with or have met through the project. And I've also asked them to write essays. I asked them to write essays about their telephone booth memories, because one of the offshoots of this project is that people want to talk about, oh, I remember this telephone booth saved my life. I had to make a phone call. It was so late. I was on the road. I was stuck at a train station. And all these really interesting memories have surfaced, and I collected them together in this book.
Very cool. Well, that answers my question of, do you have a favorite poem?
I would say, I mean, how can you choose just one, right?
Totally
But
understand.
I would say that one of the poems that, let's see, so Goldbarth under G, and of course I have it alphabetized, right? Um, okay, so one of the poets that has been a hero to me is Albert Goldbarth. And his poem Before Refrigeration is collected in this volume here and also available to dial on the Telepoem booth.